Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 18th edition of IEEE Student Branch Power Symposium. This edition, we are going to be discussing offshore grids and future developments in the North Sea. Today, we have invited 4 guests from the industry and academia to have a thorough and complete discussion on the topic. And in the end, we are going to have a panel session moderated by Professor Dirk Van Hertem in order to assess and investigate the questions regarding this topic. In the agenda, first, we are going to have a very short introduction to the IEEE Student Branch of Leuven and the activities that we organize. Then we are going to discuss the Bold Energy Islands plan as the base for the supergrid concept, a presentation by Elia Group. Next, we have another presentation by Vyria Energy on acting as an investor in offshore grid and what is the ideal business case. After that, we will have a short break, and cold beverages along with food will be presented to you in the cafeteria. And afterwards, we will continue our talk sessions on offshore bidding zones by Engie Impact, and also offshore grids and challenges for policymakers by Florence School of Regulations. I will very briefly introduce to you IEEE Student Branch Chapter, Branch of Leuven, the PES Chapter. So in the IEEE Student Branch, we have multiple chapters, and the chapter which is organizing this current event is the PES Chapter, which consists of multiple volunteers. On the top, we have Chandra, our chair, Giacomo, vice chair, myself, I'm the treasurer. Front, Sari, Merin, Shasha, and Hafiz. And some additional people who regularly are involved and help and assist us to keep all these events going. The vision and the mission of IEEE in general is fostering technological innovation and excellence for the benefits of humanity. And our vision within the chapter of Leuven itself is to create a community for students and young researchers to collaborate and share ideas and to foster growth within the energy sector. The objectives that we are currently focusing on in our chapter are to bridge the gap between industry and academia with multiple activities that we have, ranging from industrial workshops to lectures given by experts, both from academia and industry, and also supporting women in engineering, training development of young professionals, and in general, tackling challenges in the energy sector. During our past events, we had visits from the industrial partners that we have, Thermovolt, ABB, Centrica, and also SIA partners, SIA partners. We also had a wide range of technical talks given by PhD students of our own research group and also from different other research groups. Also, our flagship events, which we have annually, the Power Symposiums. Here you can see the events that we had in the last year and the event that we have currently also there. And the team is almost expanding, I would say, so that's a good thing. We also have company visits that we regularly plan. So if any company or any partners would be interested in having company visits in order to look for young talents, we also are involved in that. Other events that we organize usually is the job fair, which is one of the flagship events of the branch in general, and also these editions of Electroniat, which was held last month. So in general, if you're a young researcher or if you're working in a company and you're interested in getting involved in any of the topics that we just discussed, we are open for collaborations. We are students ourselves. We know students. We know what they want. We know how they feel. So I think that will be very beneficial for both sides. And yeah, that was just a very quick presentation in order for you to have a general overview of what we do here at IEEE. And I would also like to have your attention for the links that we have. You can follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, and also our websites for the future events that we usually hold. And if you have any questions, you can send us an email or send an message in LinkedIn. So for our first presentation, we have a presentation by Adedotun Agbemuko from Elia's group on Elia's offshore developments, Princess Elizabeth Energy Island, the gateway to future energy hub. Adedotun is a seasoned expert experienced in developing models, advanced tools, techniques, and control strategies for the operation and control of the future electric power systems with a special focus on HVDC systems. He has significantly contributed to R&D efforts at the European level aimed at understanding and advancing the state-of-the-art of existing power systems while being involved in transforming scientific knowledge into practical value. He holds a PhD degree of cum laude in electrical engineering, electrical power systems, has authored and co-authored over 20 technical publications at various international conferences and journals, and he's also a regular member of SIGRE Workgroup B4.85, the interoperability in HVDC systems, and also IEEE PES Workgroup on frequency domain techniques. He currently holds the expert position in power electronics at Elia. With that being said, Ade, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Okay. Hi, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm representing my colleague, Niels Charles. He couldn't be here, regrettably, and well, I can't do a better job than him, but I will try my best. So I will give a very brief overview of our work currently in the offshore area, particularly regarding HVDC and AC development. Well, first a little bit, we always have to advertise. Sorry about that. Huh? But as you know, there should be a slide before this, but okay. Well, as you know, Elia is the major transmission system operator for most of Belgium, well, the whole of Belgium and part of Germany, particularly the eastern part of Germany. And our main core activities are centered around, basically we are the facilitator for transmission. We facilitate both generation and the distribution side. And basically we hold everybody's hands. Before it used to be one hand on the left in the generation side and one hand on the right in the distribution, but now the hands are all over the place. But we are still right there in the middle to facilitate the transmission of energy from the generation to the resources, while also, to the loads, while also integrating residential, the new generation at the distribution side. And well, as we know, the world is changing today, and with this idea of, with this demand for us to move away from fossil fuel-driven energy sources to more renewable systems, and basically there's been an increase in demand for renewable energy sources, and this is leading to a change in the power system. Particularly, the transition is quite fast, it's quite rapid. And as a network operator, you need to be able to anticipate quite early. And in our experience, you need to be able to anticipate at least 1.5 decades to 2 decades ahead. If you don't do this, if you cannot see that far ahead, when it comes, it becomes very difficult to change, basically. And as a result of this, if you look at the very quick scenarios for Belgium, if you can look a little bit the dark bar graphs, you can see quite a significant increase in renewable energy integration. And we are seeing a large growth already. That's the expectation. But it's still expected that this is just going to cover just 50% of the load. And we're also seeing a significant increase in the consumption with the electrification in the industry and what have you. And also the peak load is expected to increase to almost 70% in 2040. So it's quite a drastic increase that we have not been used to over the decades. And so this is expected to really transition the system, and this is expected to change the way we see system operations. And if you look very quickly, as a result of all these all these rapid changes, we're starting to see that there is need to re-strategize. So at Elia, we come up with about 5 principles to support, to drive the development of and the transition from the fossil-based system to the renewable energy-based system. And the first principle is to maximize the integration of domestic renewable energy sources. And when I mean domestic in all sense. So basically, we're also looking at including residential and small-scale generation, while also developing the RAS integration capability, also inland within Belgium. So basically, the idea is to be as energy independent as possible, and then try to connect with your neighbors to smoothen out the fluctuations. And secondly, also is the realization of the Princess Elizabeth Energy Hub, which is going to serve as a kind of a hub that we can connect both renewable energy sources and also our neighbors, importantly. And fourth is also to accommodate the electrification efforts in the industry. So basically, the industry today is mostly dependent on fossil fuel system. So there is a drive now to try to move everything to electrify. Particularly, we are seeing more electric vehicles. We are trying to also to electrify the industries as well. So this is going to also increase the demand. So we are, in a way, we are also trying to facilitate this as well. Fourth is also to maximize the integration within the European electricity market, basically connect with our neighbors more and more, keep connecting, basically. And also to optimally use and expand the existing installation because, well, you cannot build everything from scratch again. So you need to find a way, a smarter way to reinvest and to re-expand the current system. And based on these 5 principles, Elia have already started putting things in place to try to drive change forward. And the first of these was basically the installation of Nemo Link that came online around 2019, and also the development of the offshore wind system, basically the 2.1 gigawatt AC connection, the one that is popularly known as the MOG-1, basically. And then next to this, the next stage of this now is to go over to the sorry. Yeah, the next stage now is the new development that is coming in the next few years, particularly which is the Princess Elizabeth Island, and is built to be both an hybrid system, both from an interconnector point of view and also from a system point of view, because we're going to have a combination of both AC and DC systems. And so we're going to have 1.4 gigawatt on the DC side and about 2.1 gigawatt on the AC side. We're also expanding the onshore system. We are building a new onshore substation. Well, not a new one, but we are significantly expanding one of the existing ones to be much more bigger to take over, be able to take the capacity. And also, as a drive to also reinforce our connections to our neighbor, there's also the plan to be able to interconnect more with the United Kingdom, which is a link that we call Nautilus. And to further reinforce this, there's also going to be an offshore platform on the UK side to integrate more offshore wind. And thirdly, is also to also connect, to use the Energy Hub as a connection point to Denmark, with a link called Triton Link. And this is going to use a DC breaker because now we are going to have 2 different DC grids, and in a way you need to be able to decouple and isolate the system. So we're going to have a DC circuit breaker in between. And fourthly, so basically these are the current developments that we have now towards the transition all the way to 2050. And if we were to dive a little bit deeper into MOG-2, so here you see MOG-1 here, and over here you can see the development of MOG-2. It's about 50 kilometers offshore from the coast, and this is going to integrate about 3.5 gigawatts of offshore renewable, offshore wind power plants. And if we were to look a little bit deeper at the current, the working 3D model of the island, so over here you see is about 100 by 70 meters, I think. And so here you have the AC models, the yellow part are the AC models. The 2 smaller ones are 700 megawatts, while the 2 bigger ones are 1,050 each. And here you have the DC converter hall. Here you have the transformer base, and then you have the DC substation, the DC switching stations, where you have interconnectors. And here you have accommodation and utility. However, the island is planned to be unmanned. But here we have some room for accommodation for typical our maintenance campaigns. And on this side, you have the quarry for moving in the heavy load, the transformer they are all going to move in through this side. And if you have a little bit more closer look, this is the design of the substation of the island. And here you have another view of the island. And then finally, if you were to look at, it's still not finalized yet, how the cables are going to be routed. We know it's about 45 to 60 kilometers, but it's still in development. Apparently, the permitting part is not the easiest part, but they're still working on it. So the cable could take any one of these routes. The coastline is quite small, but it's still currently in the process. So a few final fun facts and figures. So the island is about, the region itself is about 281 square kilometers of wind, 45 kilometers away from the shore, and 5 hectares useful area, and about 5 hectares that we cannot do much. It's a part labeled already for environmental, and it has an impact on that part. And we also have about 330 kilometers of offshore cable, AC cables, about 6 cables, 330 divided by 6 cables, basically. And then we also have 60 kilometers of offshore HVDC cable. And onshore, we have 10 kilometers each for each cables, including the HVDC cable. And for the island, the works are expected to start very early next year, all the way to 2026. And the first phase of the offshore wind farms will be commissioned around 2028, 2029, which is the AC-connected offshore wind farms. The HVDC will come a little bit around that 2029, 2030, 2031, about that. And the project is also funded by the European Union. If you want to have a little bit of a view to see the current video for the island, the initial design and the preliminary stage, you can have a look at these links, and they're quite interesting. At least I find them interesting. And this is me. This is Elia. Thank you. Do you take questions now? We have time. Okay. Do you have any questions for me? Okay. Uh, 3.5 gigawatts. In time? What do you mean in time?
Because right now we have about 2.5 months to 3 months.
From the offshore, yeah?
Yes. How much?
I think they have a 50% capacity factor, if I understand your question correctly. 50%, so about half of that. Generally, if you look at the average over time, is 50% of 3.1 gigawatts over time. But some days it's going to be 100, some days it's going to be 10. But average is about 50% capacity factor. That's the working theory, at least. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a short question. So in the facts and figures, it said that there was I think 6 times more AC lines offshore going to be built than HVDC lines. Yeah. So it's actually still mainly AC offshore.
I don't know. So you're going to have HVDC converters offshore. HVDC converters to convert to DC. Yeah. So you're going to have 6 AC cables, 220 kilovolt AC cables in parallel with the DC with DC cables. It could be it's not clear yet, but it could be, think of it as one big bundle with 3 HVDC cables bundled together. So you have one trench, and then you have 6 trench for the AC cables. Yeah. So it's 6 AC cables plus an HVDC system, HVDC cable system. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Somebody else behind.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think in the future you will connect also? So I saw there will be a DC connection onshore to connect also with the existing NEMO connector, or what's the?
No, no.
So it will be separate.
Rumor
it's
it will be
not-
separate.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
They will probably be very close to each other, the AC connection point, but they will be fully decoupled in a way. Yeah.
Why do you guys combine AC and HVDC? Is one not more cost efficient than the other one?
Not necessarily. It's a matter of rigs, and because in the European system you have about maximum allowed power loss is about 1.8 gigawatts, about 1.82 gigawatts. So if you have a 3.5 gigawatt and something happens, you're gonna be above the stated reserve, the frequency reserve. The 3.5 is you have 3.5 gigawatt. If you were to be in either AC or DC, if something happens, you lose the whole 3.5 gigawatts. So in a way, you split the. Yeah, if something happens, you lose just 2.1 gigawatt or 1.4. So in a way, you're still within the reserve capacity. So it's a matter of rigs and also, yeah, mostly rigs. Yeah. And also in innovation as well. You don't want to use an old technology, so you want to mix. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Is it also not to a large extent due to timing issues, as you said that you will have your DC converter only in, well, originally it was 27, but now today you said 29 to 31, and that might be...
It could be a little bit...
yes,
could be
flexible in timing.
Yeah, it's also, yeah, it's part of the rigs as well. Yeah, it's also part of it's also timing as well. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's right.
Because the AC cables will be in place when? Because I don't think you mentioned when the AC cables will be
the AC
installed.
cables, I'm not sure when the AC cables will be, but around the same time, around 2020, 2027, around that time. Yeah.
With the island and not with the DC?
Yeah, no, with the island, not with the DC, yeah, with the islands, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Indeed, a very interesting presentation on the energy islands. Our next presenter is going to be from the Vyria Energy Group on how to ensure a positive investment climate when further developing offshore wind. And today we are hosting Aymeric Kormoss from Vyria Energy. He graduated as energy engineer at KU Leuven with more than 10 years of experience across the entire energy market value chain. Now working for Vyria Energy, which is active as an investor and service company in wind, solar, and hydrogen protection. So with that being said, Aymeric, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the organization for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here, especially knowing that a bit more than 10 years ago, I was the one sitting on that side of the room. I recognize some faces. Okay, so the goal of my presentation is to shed a light on an investor's view when looking at the increasing objectives regarding offshore wind production in the North Sea. Now, when we talk about investors, I will quickly introduce Vyria. So Vyria is an investor in renewable energy production. I think the most important participation we have is Parkwind, which owns 4 wind farms in the North Sea and which is building 1 wind farm in Germany and has a lot of projects around the world. Vyria has sold Parkwind to a new investor, and the reason is because the developments become bigger and bigger So we needed some, Power Grid needed some extra support there. We're also active in hydrogen projects, and maybe also interesting for you, as you are mostly engineers, we also have a service department, which, for example, monitors the offshore cables from a distance to be able to detect issues with the cables well in advance of failures, which is really important because a cable breach, it costs a lot of lost production, and given the geopolitical situation, I think it's important to be able to detect other possible issues with the cables. Okay, so, but when looking at offshore wind from an investor point of view, what is important from an investor is that the revenues that are being generated by his investments cover the investment cost. And when we talk about investment costs of an electricity generating asset, the word that comes up is LCOE, which means the levelized cost of producing electricity. What is the LCOE? The LCOE is basically the sum of all costs you have when you install and maintain an energy production asset divided by the sum of the energy it produces. The levelized cost of electricity of a renewable asset only has capex and a bit of opex, but no fuel cost. So that's just important to know. Okay, but so the revenues must cover the LCOE of an investment. LCOE, we will talk about it. The word will come back a lot, so just keep it in mind. And when can an investor be certain that the revenues will cover the LCOE? Basically, when there is a sufficiently long-term, stable regulatory environment, a sufficiently long-term view on how the markets will evolve. And what I would like to share with you to this evening is some observations, 5 to be exactly, to show you that it's not that easy to, as an investor, to have comfort that there is or there will be long-term stability. A first observation, so there is a lot of offshore wind coming online, which means that the North Sea will be very crowded. There will be offshore wind turbines everywhere, you could say. But those wind turbines, they start to impact each other. Yeah? What happens, it's what we call wake effects. I think it is a beautiful picture. It's quite well known. When there is a lot of wind farms, the total yield, we say, so the energy one asset produces, it goes down. But we as an investor, we don't know when and where all wind farms will be built. My colleague from Elia just showed some timeline, but the timeline is not certain. So this is a first uncertainty. And how does that translate in the LCOE? When there is uncertainty about the volumes being produced, for example, if there is more wake effect than expected, your production goes down and your LCOE goes up, the cost goes up. And so the risk that your revenues will not cover the LCOE, your investment cost goes up. First observation. Second observation, we're not only increasing the offshore wind capacity, there is also a big increase in, for example, onshore solar capacity and onshore wind production. What does that mean? That at a certain moment, the installed capacity will be that big that at certain moments there will be a surplus of power. The consumption will not be as high as what is being produced. So, what do you do when there is a surplus? You need to stop the production of certain power plants. In the power sector, we call it curtailment. We have to curtail part of the production. We already see it today. What happens when you have to curtail your production? Your volume goes down, LCOE goes up. But as an investor, we don't know how fast this will go. And we certainly don't know how the objectives will evolve. Maybe some member states or some European states will give more subsidies or less subsidies, which will fasten or slow down the development of renewable power capacity. We don't know. It's an uncertainty, something that is not stable. So we talked about the impact on the LCOE, on the cost, but this has also an impact on the revenues. Because what happens when there is a surplus? When there is too much of something, the price goes down. So your revenues goes down. What we see today already is a lot of negative price hours. So this is a picture of the power prices in the Netherlands 2 or 3 weeks ago on April 19. And you see a price of, during at noon, minus 200 euros a megawatt hour. So what this means is that as a producer, if you keep producing, you actually have to pay to produce. Yeah? So it decreases your revenue. The more renewable power capacity will be installed, the more often there will be such a surplus, especially when you look at solar at noon, yes, which will decrease the value of your asset. So we say the capture price, the price you can capture from the market, when you produce, the prices will be low, so the price you can capture goes down. We call it cannibalization. Yeah? So the renewable power assets, they cannibalize themselves. But we don't know as an investor how fast it will go. In the past, the estimations of solar power generation forecasted by the International Energy Agency were consistently too low. And as an investor, when you see that your capture price is lower than expected, you have an issue. Okay, there are other uncertainties, of course, which also have an impact on the price. In Belgium, you all know that there was going to be a nuclear phase-out, but in the end there is no phase-out, or the discussions are still ongoing. The Engie and the government started discussing about a prolongation of the lifetime of the Belgian power plants 1 year ago. We still don't know what will happen. Will the lifetime be extended with 10 years, maybe with 20 years, maybe with 15? We don't know what will happen. But this has an impact on the total installed generation capacity and also on the value of what you will produce as a renewable energy producer. Good. Third observation, and that's very much linked to what my colleague of Elia just told you. To be able to transport the huge increase in renewable capacity that is being installed, you need to invest in the grid. But the issue with investing in the grid is that no one wants a big, beautiful pylon in his garden. So Elia knows very well the symptoms of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Although The Economist 2 or 3 weeks ago put on his cover, we need to hug pylons. I don't know if many people like to do that. But what's the issue? Again, if the grid is not developed fast enough, if it cannot follow the development of renewables, no transport possible, you have to curtail surpluses, so your energy production goes down, your LCOE, your cost goes up. But we don't know how long it will take before, for example, Ventilus, one of the crucial high voltage power grids in Belgium, one of the crucial high voltage power grid connections that is needed to be able to transport the offshore wind towards the industry, for example. We don't know exactly when it will be built and when it will be finished. It's an uncertainty. Now, we're talking about the power grid. I think it's also important to take a look at the offshore wind zone that we are going to develop. So what you see is the North Sea, with the UK there, Belgium is here, the Scandinavian countries here. So let's first look at the picture on the left for you. This is the current power grid in the North Sea. The gray lines are the limitations of the exclusive economic zone, so it's not a power line. It's quite empty. So there's quite some work to do if you want to being able to connect the offshore wind farms that will be built in the North Sea towards the consumption centers which are located on the mainland. It's an extra uncertainty. If you look at on the right side, right-hand picture, you see the current oil and gas infrastructure in the North Sea. And I think it's quite clear there is quite a lot of infrastructure available already. And that's why it's really important to also think about hydrogen. If the power grid, which is costly and which needs time to be built, cannot be built in time, which means that new offshore wind farms will not be able to connect, to inject power into the grid, maybe hydrogen can be a solution. It's also important to think about costs. Investing in an offshore grid costs a lot of money. If there is already a gas grid, maybe hydrogen can play a role. Now there's something else. There's talks about creating what we call one or more offshore bidding zones in the North Sea. Now, what is a bidding zone? A bidding zone is a geographically delimited area where supply and demand lead to a certain price, a price per hour mostly. And the price of a certain bidding zone is equal to the price of the neighboring bidding zones if there is no congestion in between. So if there is enough power grids between two bidding zones, the prices will converge, will be the same quite often. However, when there is congestion, for example, when there is not enough offshore grid, or if there is congestion onshore because there was too much NIMBY, not in my backyard syndrome, then power prices start to diverge. And what happens when there is a surplus of production in a bidding zone compared to consumption, prices go down. When there is a surplus of consumption compared to production, prices goes up. Yeah? So first conclusion, or first insight, an offshore bidding zone would only contain production units, offshore wind production units. So the prices will tend to go down. And this is an example of what you could have. Sorry. These are the prices of several bidding zones for one day. What you could see in the future, if nothing happens, is that the price in the bidding zone, offshore bidding zone, is consistently lower than the prices on the mainland. It's just an example, it's fictive, but that is what could happen. Okay. Now a second element, and that's also important, when prices are consistently low, the signal you give to investors is there is enough energy available there in that bidding zone. Please invest in consumption because it will help me. Yeah, you will be able to consume at a low price and it will help drive prices higher. But in an offshore bidding zone, it's quite difficult to just install new industries or whatever. So again, that's where hydrogen could play a role. Good. Fourth observation. We see in the sector that there are some issues with the supply chain. So the big wind turbine manufacturers, which are Vestas and Siemens Gamesa, they really have difficulties to stay out of the red numbers. That's because there are a lot of reasons. But this could lead, for example, to an increase in capex, in investment costs, because maybe the numbers, the figures of Vestas and Siemens Gamesa are red because they ask too little and their prices are too low. So it could lead to an increased capex, which, when you look at the LCE formula, increases the cost. Okay, but yeah, we don't know what will happen. The supply chain is very global. Anything can have an impact on it. Last element, some of you will maybe recognize this picture. If we want to build a lot of wind turbines in the North Sea, we have to start thinking about the impact on nature, on the environment. And then one of the elements that pops up is, for example, it makes a lot of noise when you install a wind turbine in the North Sea, in the sea. Noise propagates very quickly in the water, so you install bubble curtains around your installation site to ensure that there's not too much noise for mammals in the sea. It increases your costs. Another element that often pops up is, we have to protect the birds because there is, people are scared that the wind turbines will kill a lot of birds. Now, I can assure you, at Parkwind, they have analyzed it. There are not a lot of collisions with birds. But these are pictures that you see then in the press. But again, this could, if you have to invest in nature protection, which is important, it increases your capex. But also, if to protect birds, you need to stop your wind turbines, it will lower the volume you produce, so it increases your LCE. Now, my message is not that I don't like birds. I really like birds. It's important to protect them. But if we want to protect them, we need to ensure that our climate change is kept into control. And so we need to install renewable power to do that. If you want to protect birds from being killed, there are other reasons that we have to focus on. Okay. So these were some observations. My message is, as an investor, there are some elements that you cannot control and that leads to uncertainty. But as an investor, you want to be certain. So let's look at possible ways of solving it. One thing that we increasingly see is what we call corporate power purchase agreements. What is a corporate power purchase agreement? It's a contract between a consumer directly with a producer. What is the advantage of it? The producer can ask the consumer to guarantee a certain revenue that covers the cost, the LCOE. Yeah? It's a guarantee. It lowers the uncertainty. And the volume of corporate PPAs goes up year after year. Especially in the US and the Scandinavian countries, we see a lot of them because how the market functions is a bit different. The names that pop up in corporate PPA deals are often the same for names. They're here on the slide. But there's a reason for that. First of all, the consumption of these tech companies goes up year after year because the computing power they need to cover demand goes up year after year. But the second, and that's the most important reason, why these companies show up there is they are very credit-worthy. So for a producer that needs to invest in a big wind farm, he will not conclude a contract on the long term with a company he doesn't know or that is not financially healthy. So the credit rating, the stability of those companies needs to be good. So the number of companies that are that could sign corporate PPAs is not that big. So just one element, not to overestimate. Now there are other elements that also play. If I am a big consumer and I sign a corporate PPA, a power purchase agreement for the long term with a producer, I will be happy as long as the price that's in the contract is lower than the market price. Where is the pointer? I don't find it. Okay. So as long as the corporate PPA is in the money, we say, I will be very happy. But from the moment the market prices start dropping and from the moment they are lower than the price that's in the contract, I, as a company, I don't want to have a competitive disadvantage compared to my peers, so I will try to get out of it. Yeah, I will try to get out of it. And we call it often, they try to invoke hardship, and that's when lawyers become very happy, of course. But it's really a risk. So a corporate PPA is not something that it decreases uncertainty, but it's not the perfect solution. Neither there are some things to take into account. Now, we talked about offshore bidding zones. It's also one of the topics of tonight. So if I am a consumer and I want to sign a long-term contract for power, it's important that the production takes place as close as possible to where I consume. If the consumption takes place in the offshore bidding zone somewhere far away, where the prices are maybe different from the price at which I can buy power in my zone, it's a bit difficult to sign corporate PPAs or over a long distance. So again, it's an uncertainty because if offshore bidding zone comes there, become active, corporates will start asking more questions, will maybe not be prepared to sign a corporate PPA. Okay. Next. So corporate PPAs is one possible way of solving the instability, the uncertainty issue. But we know that corporates are not perfect. There's only one entity that we know that can give more certainty than a corporate, and that is the government. So the second solution is government support. Now, government support, it's not only about giving a bag of money. It can take other forms. And one form that we increasingly see being talked about, and it's also part of the European power market reform that is being proposed, is that as a government, you give some extra guarantee towards a producer for, in the case, a corporate that was not bankable enough, that had not a high enough credit rating, wants to sign a corporate PPA, or for when the corporate goes broke or whatever. So it's more guarantee than a bag of money. And it helps to keep finance costs, for example, down, because lower risk, because the government gives some guarantee, means lower finance costs, so it decreases your LCOE. Okay. If we then talk about bags of money, which is also still important, what we also see, and it's also mentioned in the European power market reform, is that support takes the form of two-sided contract for difference. What is a two-sided contract for difference? It means that the government guarantees that the revenues for the investor will cover the LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. And why is it called two-sided contract for difference? Because when prices are higher than the LCOE, we call it then the strike price, the producer will pay the surplus revenue to the government, to society. When prices are lower, so for example, when cannibalization effects start to, how do you say it, get are not under control anymore, then the government will top up the missing money, the missing revenues. So this is quite a good solution, but we have seen in the past, it's important to design your subsidy mechanism in such a way that you ensure that the increasing capacity of renewable electricity can be, that the grid can absorb it easily. And that's not the case when, due to subsidy mechanisms, your wind turbines become the new power plants that don't look at the market because, yeah, I get subsidies, so I don't look at it. No, so it's also written in the new power market reform. It's important that subsidy mechanisms are designed in such a way that power plants that get the support react in what we call a market-conform way to power price signals. And basically, it means when power prices are low or negative, that your production asset reacts on that price and stops producing, is being curtailed. Okay, and what does that mean? What does that mean in practice? For example, that when you look at the LCOE formula, that as an investor, you don't need to guess how much energy will produce, given the uncertainty about curtailment and power prices that go down, which could lead to curtailment, and so on and so on. All uncertainties, you don't have to take them into account, because the government could say, I will cover your LCOE, but your LCOE is based on the power you could have been producing. Yeah? It's something we support. So whenever you produce or not, based on the power you could have been producing, the government will guarantee a certain revenue. And that ensures that as a producer you react properly to market signals. Good. I'm almost there. So just some extra elements. So we have talked about the subsidy mechanism. What is also important, and also for an investor, is that the tender mechanism is designed well. So the support mechanisms is, before you say, I will give you support, as a government you organize a tender to choose a winning bid, a winning contender that gets the support. Now, what we've seen in the past, two examples, one in Denmark, it was a Tor tender, where because of the tender mechanism, the government had to pick a winner by luck. So the company that was chosen is not because it was the best bid, but just because they got lucky. It's not what you want. Also, as an investor, that's not what you want, because you put a lot of time in participating to a tender. And then last element, and it's also something that's very important, the Hornsea 3 offshore wind farm, which is an offshore wind farm at the coast of the UK, in front of the UK. Ørsted won the tender, but now they say to the government, the price I bid was too low, I need some extra support. So you need to ensure that such behaviors or such gaming or arbitrage is not possible. So that brings us to the conclusion. What are the solutions to the uncertainties you see as an investor? It's corporate PPAs when possible, but the uncertainties are that big that the government must be there when needed. That's it. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was interesting.
All right, before we proceed to dinner, if there's any questions, we can quickly have one or two. Yep.
Well, super interesting presentation, by the way. I have a question. Can we include services in LCOE? So on top of energy, you can also gain from services that you can provide from your offshore wind farms.
So you mean, for example, ancillary
grid services?
Yeah. So I think ancillary services are becoming more and more a part of the revenue stream. So you need to take into account But when you look at ancillary services, first of all, it's quite a small market, and it's very difficult to foresee or estimate the future revenues because it's such a small market that any decision by the government or anything that happens could immediately decrease or increase the value of it. So yeah, it's something to take into account. What we also see in Belgium, for example, but also in France, the capacity is also has a value. So the fact just of being there also increasingly has a value. But of course, for a wind farm, a renewable power producer, capacity will only produce power when there is wind and you cannot control it. So the value of capacity is very low, which is not the case for a gas-fired power plant, which has a high capacity value.
Is there any like estimation currently how much percentage of the services can be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the estimations, but I think it will become more and more important that renewable power producers behave flexibly on the market. By which I mean renewable power is cause of balancing issues, but they're also the solution. Is if they react correctly on market signals, so if the subsidy mechanisms allow it, it's important that they act in a market conform way to help stabilize the grid and to ensure that there's no costs being generated somewhere else. If a wind turbine acts flexibly, maybe the 2 or 3 batteries are not needed. So the cost for the system goes down. But actually, if you are interested in that topic, I advise you to read one of the publications of the International Energy Agency of 2020 about levelized cost of electricity. And there's a chapter about the system cost of renewables and the value-added LCOE, they call it. So it's an LCOE calculation which also takes into account the value and the cost generated by different types of assets in the entire energy system. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah.
You're not that hungry, yeah? You can ask as much questions as you want.
All right, final question.
Yeah, you seem to be very optimistic on hydrogen, which is, I mean, you're not the only one, and there is an entire hydrogen lobby of people that have pipelines that don't know what to put into them. But yeah, it's not that easy to actually make them efficient. Also because electrolyzers at scale are not that available, and especially offshore. So is that something that you see as something happening before? Yeah, something for the energy island, or maybe for the next energy island, or the one after that in 2050?
Thank you for the question. I think it's a very good question. First of all, I don't have the answer. So we just see that there are some issues with focusing only on electricity, and that hydrogen could play a role. So we need to look past the efficiency loss. That's important. Because there is a loss of efficiency means you lose, it costs money, but investing in a power grid also costs money. Investing in ways to flexibly absorb all the variations in energy production caused by renewables, it also costs money. So I have never seen until today a cost and balance analysis about taking everything into account. And the European Commission, for example, does not do it either. So that's an issue. Regarding the Princess Elizabeth Island, what we see is that there is congestion onshore in Belgium. That's an issue. Pentilus, which is quite known from the press, but there's another connection, Boucle-du-Hainaut, in the Walloon region, which is also very important, and which will also take time to complete. There is onshore congestion. What has Elia done with the Princess Elizabeth Island? It has shifted the congestion onshore towards the island. So now we have congestion on the island, because if all wind turbines of the new zone will produce power, we will not be able to import power from the UK anymore, because the cables that are being built between the island and onshore are limited in capacity. So there is congestion that has been shifted towards the island. Our vision is that the congestion should take place still onshore, not on the island. And if there are issues with further developing the onshore grid because of NIMBY or because of I don't know what, then hydrogen could also play a solution. Yeah? Because you could say we install electrolyzers close to the shore to capture the energy produced with the Belgian offshore wind turbines, but maybe also with the wind turbines in the North Sea. We transform it to hydrogen, and we use hydrogen as an energy carrier towards our industrial consumption sites, not to help them decarbonize. And don't underestimate the importance of hydrogen to decarbonize industry. We have hydrogen projects, and we see a lot of interest. But it's, of course, very difficult because the electrolyzer technology is not quite mature, and you need some materials that cost a lot of money. But
there are two things. One, to put it into hydrogen, but then to put it back into electricity.
Yeah,
maybe not. Maybe you might want to use it for something else.
Because energy is more, and a figure that is important when you have these discussions is currently in Belgium, of the final energy consumption, only 20% is electric, 80% is fossil fuels. So we need to electrify a big part of that 80%. But you imagine the investments you need to electrify everything. So again, we must not be blind to possible alternatives such as hydrogen. But it's a difficult equation. I don't know all the numbers. I think it's something that has to be done by governments, which have all the numbers, which have big plans to. But we have to be honest about this.
Yeah, I think that's the problem, because there are many CBAs, but it's depending on which religion that you have, whether you're an electrical or gas-formed religion, that decides which one is the most.
Our CEO comes from Fluxy, so he's from the. But it's good to challenge, to be challenged, and to challenge also you, because I know what your point of view is. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much for both the presenter and the audience. It's indeed a very interesting topic and engaging. We're going to have more of that after the dinner break, so stay tuned, and you can follow my colleagues to the cafeteria, and you will be provided with pizza and also cold beverages. You can also continue the discussions and networking at the cafeteria. Thank you, everyone. I hope it was an enjoyable break in the middle, and now everyone's refreshed and ready for the second part. For the second part of the presentations, we have a presentation by Engie Impact on offshore bidding zones, how to extend the European electricity market with offshore grids. Our presenter today is Gerd Kupper. He's a senior analyst at Engie Impact, based in Brussels. He joined Engie Group in 2010. At that time, GDF Suez. He holds a PhD in energy economics, a master in energy studies, in economics again, both from the KU Leuven, Belgium, and a master in economics from the University of Liège. Gerd is passionate about power market design questions in systems that are increasingly dominated by intermittent renewables. So with that being said, Gerd, the floor is yours, and please welcome him with a warm applause.
That's the okay. So thanks for the invitation. So I'm a bit nostalgic, because the last time I was here in Arenberg was back in 2010 when I defended my PhD here. So nice to be back here. Yeah, again, thanks for being here, and I'm happy to give you some view on how to extend the European electricity market, and maybe with a focus on offshore. But as you will see in the presentation, so some of the aspects are more general, so are wider than just offshore bidding zones or offshore, the importance of offshore, and some aspects are maybe more specific. And yeah, let's see what happens in the next slides. That's indeed my first slide. Yeah, so I think what we all know, more or less. So if you look at decarbonization studies, and that's what you are going to, what you're obliged to do actually by 2050 at the latest. So it's net zero at the energy level. So not just electricity, but energy-wise. So that means a huge effort that needs to be done. And if you look at studies, what is always coming back, there are always of course, differences according to assumptions. It's all about assumptions and predictions and crystal balls to some extent as well. But what always comes back is the dominance of renewable electricity and especially PV and wind being wind onshore and offshore. So that's one of the stable things that is always coming back. So going to net zero by 2050 at the latest requires a massive electrification of the energy system first. So you have to move from renewable gases, or from natural gas or coal or whatever, so from CO2 emitting sources to electricity, either directly or indirectly via power to gas. Yeah. So that's one thing, and so we are going to see these changes in the coming years. So far, we had, of course, already some increase of renewables, but this is going to fasten in the coming years. So we will see already by 2030 massive changes in the energy system and in the electricity system. Of course, if you look at this. So that's just a generation mix for the region around the North Sea, based on some calculations we did. And this may be also a graph that you should in the meantime be familiar with. So we are seeing more, let's call it intermittency or maybe more variability in the system. So you see more and more, so this is a winter and a summer week for the year 2030 already, in terms of hourly dispatch for a representative week, let's say in winter and summer. And you see, of course, the dominance of PV and wind again. Wind, of course, a bit more in the winter week, and solar PV in the summer. And so you need a lot of variability, and we would say, okay, we need flexibility. So that's always a big word that people mention. So indeed, we need more flexibility. That's actually what is going to be needed, yes. But on the other hand, you should also not forget that demand for flexibility is increasing, but also supply of flexibility is increasing. So we will have different ways of flexibility that are going to be available, at least available in the system. So we speak here about batteries, but also EVs that are going to be operated in a more agile way, so 2G, etc., two-way communication, etc. The same for heat pumps. The way electrolyzers are going to be operated will also have a huge impact on the amount of flexibility that is available. So I'm not too pessimistic about integrating all this, because we have also massive increase of supply of flexibility. The question is more how to bring that into the system, how to make sure that the right decisions are taken in terms of flexibility, amongst others. And so what do we expect from the market from all that? Well, the market should do what it's supposed to do, provide price signals, not tariffs, but price signals. It's about, if you want, the invisible hand giving some information to all kinds of actors in the system. So what we expect from a market is to make sure that prices provide the right information, the right level of information. And so it's about what we often say, getting the prices right. Yeah, so that's a slide also that I like to show, that it's really making sure again that you realize that the market is the power system is organized. We took the choice to organize it in a market-based way. So let the price work. And it's about getting the price right. It's not about tariffs, because tariffs are regulatory defined. So it's about prices. The thing is that electricity markets have to be designed, because for the physical properties, so you have to have a minimum level of centralization in order to make sure that the price is giving the right types of decisions. And in the end, if you do that wrong, well, you have to manage the things out of the market, which is typically less transparent, and so leads to inefficiencies in the system. So it's really about getting prices right. So why am I saying that? So what is actually missing today? So that's a bit of a snapshot of the European way of organizing the electricity system. So it's based around this yellow thing, which is called the European target model, but which is complemented with already a series of additional mechanisms, long-term contracts to incentivize different kinds of investments. So it's already a hybrid system today. very often we have heard we have to move to a hybrid system. We actually are already in a hybrid system. So the question is, what is missing in all that picture? And that's a bit the question I'm going to answer also, especially with respect to integration of more offshore renewable energy into the system. What is missing? What do we miss in that? So luckily, because of the energy crisis we have seen last year and this year, so the last years actually, there was a lot of questions about this model. Some people were advocating for complete change, sometimes back to regulation, but luckily, so I would say was for the moment, again, some kind of consensus that actually this system based on short-term marginal pricing is not so bad. Yeah. The question is then more, and we spend a lot of time to get it there where we are. So it would be a bit strange to move back to something that we actually left 20 years ago. And you do not change that from in just 1 year. So the question is, do we need to complement this with something? And I would say what is going to change with more renewables and with more offshore is two things: congestion, and maybe also what is missing is the absence of long-term contracts to address investment risks. The first one is really about so having a price that is not reflecting anymore the right information on the system. So in terms of location, especially in terms of congestion in the grid, and we can expect that with more decentralized generation, we might see an increasing amount of congestion in the system that is not currently addressed by bidding zones. And we have this discussion regularly, but especially also this time again on redefining the bidding zones in Europe. For instance, the suggestion to have maybe 2, 3 or 4 bidding zones in Germany. So that's something that was, I would say, taboo for a few years ago in Germany, but now maybe people are thinking more about that option. The second thing is about long-term contracts, but I will really come back to that point afterwards. It's really quickly, because risks are changing. It's not just a merchant risk, but what we are seeing more and more is a risk related to climate change and the regulatory uncertainty. That is certainly not decreasing. In terms of bidding zones, congestion first. So I would say that overall, that should lead to smaller bidding zones. There are questions about that. So some people think that, okay, if we move to smaller bidding zones, so we have smaller bidding zones, so smaller markets, so that means that maybe actors in that bidding zone will have more market power, so we will see issues of market power. The economic literature is clear about that. It's not a question of market design, it's a fundamental issue, market power. So if you have market power, you will also have it in zones with larger zones, because you cannot avoid it, so because you always have this redispatch then afterwards, and there you will also see some market power abuse. So if there's a market power question, it's less a question of market design, but more a fundamental question that needs to be addressed. There is, of course, an issue about liquidity. Liquidity means that usually you want to be in a market where you can easily sell and buy electricity without too much searching. And that, of course, is getting an issue if you go to smaller bidding zones by construction somehow. But that means different things. That means first that probably we have to concentrate liquidity more. So, and I would say in intraday we will move more to auctions rather than just continuous trading, which is the base assumptions in the European market design. So they had this still auction-based. Intraday is typically more continuous trading, so bilateral trading. So I think so there we will see more auctions happening also in intraday to account for improved information on wind outages and so on. So you have to concentrate liquidity. So that's the first thing if you go especially to smaller bidding zones. The second one is that if you go to smaller bidding zones, what is going to change is the risk between those smaller bidding zones, or even nodes if you want in extreme. And so you have not just to hedge your energy, but also the regional differences, so the transmission risk. Which means that we have to go further on improving financial transmission rights in Europe, which is at this stage still at some low level of development, I would say. And then we have, so that's true for all the things. And then we have something which is specific about offshore bidding zones, but honestly speaking, I would say also maybe a very specific, which applies to hybrid offshore projects that are there in dedicated bidding zones. I think I have a separate slide on that. So that means that overall, smaller bidding zones are probably becoming more likely and more needed from a more economic point of view. So smaller bidding zones means better integration of information in the pricing. So you can only improve things, but you should never do that alone. You have to complement it with additional measures, meaning especially hedging, allowing people to hedge accordingly with financial transmission rights. And also other changes maybe to be done in the way markets are organized. A small point about offshore, hybrid offshore projects, so that are projects that are connected to several bidding zones. And the standpoint of the European Commission is basically that dedicated offshore bidding zones are the best way forward to integrate those assets in the system. And I would agree with that. The smaller the bidding zones, the better it is, I would say. But that also means to be complemented with something. And I think we had some of that discussion already. So the risk is, of course, that those interconnection that are linked with that projects might be reduced. Well, the part that is given to the market to address congestion issues in some other larger bidding zones. And that's, of course, a kind of risk that those projects would be faced to, and which is a bit a kind of risk that other onshore projects are not facing. And what could be done about that is, for instance, foresee a kind of what we call the transmission access guarantee that would internalize that the fact that TSOs might reduce some of the transmission capacity to address congestion somewhere else. And that would somehow internalize that. But again, so it's a small thing, I would say, that is really specific to hybrid offshore projects in dedicated bidding zones. So that's in terms of short-term pricing. So making sure that prices convey the right information to all kind of actors. That's, I think, becoming really relevant if we talk about the right location of electrolyzers, of storage, of demand-side flexibility, of demand to cool. And generation, of course. And next to that, that's I think also what is very often thought is that short-term prices is good for the dispatch, but it does not necessarily attract investment, because investment is about long-term, some level of long-term certainty, not certainty, but some risk allocation that is sufficient to trigger investments. And there we need some kind of long-term contracting for thermal capacity. We can think about capacity remuneration mechanisms, which are still rather the exception. So it really has, at European level, so it really has to be justified towards DEC. So it's not something that is per se part of the market design. You have to fight for it. Maybe for assets that are running with renewable gases, that might also be kind of dispatchable power agreements. It's a kind of specific CRM that is now being implemented in the UK, for instance, but still not in the European Union. For renewables, we have basically two things in there, but we touched upon that already when I arrived. I think two ways of doing that, two-sided contracts for difference. In the meantime, you should know what it is about. I think we had a presentation of that. There are still, the European Commission presents this as one main element of public support. There are still design questions that have to be addressed. Is it really capability based or production as produced? Or what is the reference price, etc. But overall, I think that's a good thing. It helps also addressing energy crisis situations in a kind of elegant way, I would say, because if you have again, price spikes like the ones we have seen last year. So it's an automatic skimming of excessive rents that goes back to the state. But of course, it also implies that if prices are very low, the state has to give money to investors. That's part of the game. So that's the it's a two-sided contract. But next to that, so what we see more and more, and especially related to offshore generation, is private PPAs. So there's no public intervention there. So the only thing that the public authorities have to do is to allow for them, especially also enable maybe smaller consumers to take part of that, to take benefit of that. But it's what we see is that the market is valuing this, and so we see here a drastic increase of these PPAs over the last years, and I think that's also should be supported. At least barriers should be removed, because it was already mentioned. So we need a massive investment in renewables, and I guess public money only cannot stem this. So we need to rely both on public and private money to manage this. So this is why I think it's a good thing that the European Commission presented these two things as the things that are required for incentivizing investment. Yeah, so that's it. So offshore, yes. So it was not so much focused on offshore, but while smaller bidding zones is something that is valid for all the assets. It's also good for offshore renewable integration. So we speak here especially about dedicated offshore bidding zones. And then, yeah, maybe more specific things which are related to the PPAs, which is very often done for indeed offshore, and yeah, so the transmission access guarantees. So you can read also this if you want. And yeah, so that's it. And by the way, so if you're interested, so you are all students, or most of you. So yeah, so feel free to contact us. So that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for one or two questions.
Yeah.
If you hold this, please. Give this to me. If there's any questions.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. I was just curious to know what is your take on the heat pumps on the building levels and on the building sides and district sides. And do you see the bidding zones, then would they be divided into transmission and distribution run markets, or do you think there should be a unanimous market for the flexibility?
Yeah, is that working? Yes. So it's a n-1. Yeah, so no, so flexibility is, so that's also something, people think that flexibility is something different than energy. In the end, everything is energy. So it's just a question of delta. So, and flexibility is already treated nowadays in the market. So we have flexibility that is addressed in the day-ahead market, which is an hourly market, but then afterwards, so we have finer granularity in the intraday, and then even more in the balancing market. So flexibility somehow is already addressed somehow. So the question is, do we need other flexibility products? And then we can think about fast reacting reserves of things like this. So that's things that we have seen already appearing in islands like Ireland, for instance. So it's maybe a question of new products to address rampings that are increasing. But for the question of heat pumps, I would say so. Well, first of all, yeah, indeed. So I would say heat pumps are getting more important, because you have to decarbonize also the building sector. So heat pumps are an important part of that equation. And then it's about making sure that heat pumps are also reacting to prices. And there we speak about time varying price contracts, where you will pay a different price depending on the moment when you are using these heat pumps, and if you combine it with some kind of storage, or the building as such is a kind of storage as well. So you can provide some flexibility in the way you do that, but that would then be based on the signal that is coming from the bidding zone where this heat pump is. There is of course also this discussion about local flexibility markets, but yeah, so it's yeah, so to be seen what is coming out of that. Yes. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. I find it very insightful. And mine is more of a question for reflection. So you mentioned two very important aspects for market design. One of them being, right, that you have to adjust the market for the new realities, be that bidding zone reconfiguration or constantly adjusting a little bit. And the other one is that you need some level of certainty through longer term contracts. And in my mind, these are a little bit conflicting, right? Like, it's very hard to have long-term certainty if the immediate reaction is that you are going to rewrite the rules of the market. So what's your reflection on that issue?
Indeed, that is contradictory, and that's creating a part of the regulatory uncertainty risk that I also mentioned on some of the slides. So, it's really... maybe a few things. So, of course, we have opted in Europe for a zonal representation of the grid, and that means a simplification of the grid, as opposed to what we have, for instance, in some of the US regions where you have markets that's typically a nodal system. There you have a nice, because it's elegant in the way, because it's adapting automatically to congestion, so there's always the right information somehow provided. So you do not have this discussion about reviewing the bidding zones in the US, because it's internalized in the market clearing. In Europe, so we have opted for these bidding zones, and typically we started from national bidding zones, and if you change that, you create, of course, winners and losers. What you can do is several things. So, of course, if I take, for instance, the example of Germany, so you have, let's say, 2 bidding zones, then north-south, let's say. The generator that is located in the north would lose. What you can do is compensating by allocating, for instance, free financial transmission rights, because then he's capturing the regional price difference, and so that's the way it is done. It has been done when in some of the US systems you move from nodal from zonal to nodal. You compensated people for that disadvantage by allocating for free some of the financial transmission rights. You can do the same for the consumers in the south, then in that case, because they would face higher prices. You have to compensate people for the negative impact you impose by changing market design that was maybe not foreseen at the moment of investment. So you're right. So you have to compensate to not lose credibility somehow. Another thing is that, if you decide about revising bidding zones, I would suggest to go directly to many small bidding zones. So I take again the example of the current bidding zone review. ASO is proposing 4 bidding 2, 3 or 4 bidding zones for Germany, but then go directly to 4 bidding zones and forget about this decision for the next 10 years. Because otherwise, if you go to 2 bidding zones, in 5 years we will have again the same discussion, blah blah blah. And so it's taking a lot of it's creating a lot of uncertainty. So maybe it's better than to go directly to more bidding zones than just to have a gradual approach there. That's, I think, the second way you should approach that thing.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your answer.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have a question about the market, the public obligations that governments can impose, because you mentioned that intervention is sometimes needed. When talking about flexibility in heat pumps and cars and stuff like that, do you think that there should be some kind of obligation to provide that flexibility to the market, or not? Because it's not part of the power market reform, but we see that the flexibility is not really being offered.
Yeah, but
or it's very difficult.
But then the question is, why do people not offer that flexibility? Because maybe it's not worth doing it. And I'm not interested, while I'm being in the sector, I'm not interested to look at my screen all the time to see what's the current cost of my energy. So people, I think, are not so much at decentralized levels. So yeah, the gain is maybe still too small, and it's not that something is not offered, that it's not that it should be forced, because it just means the market just tells you maybe it's not worth doing, and so there are better alternatives than this. So, but in the end, it's also, of course, always is a kind of mixture between market-based and command and control. So sometimes it's not, the market has no value because you know more or less the solution, then you can impose it directly. So the market is there to incentivize the right decisions where you per se do not have sufficient information to take a good decision as a government. And so I typically would not impose to provide that flexibility, but what should be done is yeah, so making sure that first of all we get the energy use less carbon intensive, and then flexibility is part of is a question of yeah, getting access to price time varying price contracts, but that's already in the market.
You could impose, for example, to heat pump manufacturers or car manufacturers to have an API that is acceptable to all, so that those who want it can.
But that's I would rely a bit on the market forces. So if the market sees a potential, then they will offer it at the right moments. So otherwise, I'm a bit hesitant about taking too many centralized actions, because you can just pick the wrong winner also. So you have to set the incentives right, and then you have to leave it maybe to the market, because they have in principle better information than the central authority.
All right, thank you very much. Now we are moving to the final presentation of the day before having the panel session. Our next presenter is going to be from Florence School of Regulations, Leonardo Meeus, and he's going to present on offshore grids and the challenges for policymakers. Can we actually make everyone happy in this scenario or not? A brief introduction about the presenter. So Leonardo is a professor at the European University Institute. He's the director of the Florence School of Regulation and the Loyola de Palacio Chair on European Energy Regulation and Policy in the Robert Schuman Center. Leonardo is also part-time professor at the KU Leuven in the engineering department. He also teaches public affairs at Aymeric Business School, where he used to be a partner. Leonardo is an editor for the IEEE Transactions on Energy Markets, Policy, and also Regulation. He published the open access book, The Evolution of Electricity Markets in Europe, and blogs about research with impact. With that being said, Leonardo, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining.
Thank you. So, yes, good evening, all of you. Now, first challenge for me before arriving here was to prepare. And when preparing, I thought, okay, first of all, in which template am I going to make my slides? Because I am a professor of the KU Leuven, and I'm brand new at the KU Leuven, back after many years of being away. So I wanted to show my KU Leuven, branding. But then I realized the IEEE organizers probably wanted to have a bit more exotic professor on the program. That's why they put my affiliation, Florence School of Regulation, because otherwise the audience would have thought another KU Leuven professors. We had enough of those. So that's why you will see the template in the one of Florence. Now, the second challenge I had when preparing, after I chosen my PowerPoint template, was to realize that most of the research I'm going to present to you is a bit old. I actually worked quite a lot on regulatory issues on offshore 10 years ago. So what do you do when you present older research? First, you think, might anyone in the public have already seen it? Well, students, wait, 10 years ago, probably the age of my son today, probably you've never seen that presentation before. So that's not a problem. Second, if you age after a while, cars, old cars, we call them what? Old-timers, evergreens, classics, right? So I decided to call my older research actually my offshore grid classics, if you allow me. And then, of course, to be cool, you have to say something about the electricity market reform. As you have seen, the previous speakers did the same trick as I. So I'm going to do a bit of that as well. And then I'm going to give you a flavor of why I think 10 years ago, the things we were discussing are still relevant today. It's really not outdated, unfortunately. We still face the same challenges, but the research needs an update. That's why I already agreed with Dirk that, offshore we can do more than technology research. We can also do some more updated research on policy, regulation, and markets. And okay, I think that's enough, right? As an intro, let's just start. First, big question we had 10 years ago, and I think it's still a big question. So, who should actually develop offshore grid connections? we have offshore wind farm developers, but who should connect? Should it be these wind farm developers themselves? Should it be the transmission system operators, or should it be third parties? Still an open question. I'm not going to do the poll. We don't have time. It's late. We just had pizza. You know, let's just immediately jump to the answer, right? I know what Dirk thinks, but I don't know if he wants to share it, but he has clear views on that. But why did we actually thought it was a relevant question? Well, already 10 years ago, we realized, whoops, what we're doing offshore is quite special. Because when onshore we connect a wind farm, we don't really bother about the connection. It's relatively cheap. But offshore, already 10 years ago, we started to see some projects that were really big in standards of 10 years ago. Now we're talking about projects that are way bigger than that. But already 10 years ago, there were a few bubbles appearing in our graph. Meanwhile, they have been built. So, you know, bigger offshore wind farms that were going to be connected by HVDC VSC. Just a test, does anyone still know what VSC is? That was one of the first things I have to learn to be among engineers. You know, to show my credibility in the engineering department. This was, you know, I added it specially to my graph already years ago. So what did some countries decide? Well, not the same as you clearly see. So basically you had Germany that said, we think the TSO can better do all these connections of these offshore wind farms. Sweden at that time said, no, we asked the generators to do it. And you had the UK that were the first ones to experiment with a third party model. Now, when we analyzed it, as you can see there, with color coding, we thought at that time that maybe from a planning perspective, you know, there are some advantages in the German model because you could cluster certain projects, right, and build a connection for more than one offshore wind farm if the TSO is doing it, because they're looking at all these connections. In Sweden, we thought, yes, that's a bit of a problem. If every offshore wind farm developer has to do it for their own project, it's more complicated, right, to cluster projects. The UK, in the initial implementation, was not really trying to plan or aggregate projects. They were really just individual tenders. But it was orange because we thought they could clean up their act. But of course, yeah, obviously it's nice to have a bit of different parties involved in development of new technology. And that was then clearly the disadvantage of the German model as opposed to the Swedish and the UK model. Just to show you some nice pictures, this is how the UK model worked. They actually created offshore transmission owners, OFTOs. So these are people that own one asset, or potentially more than one if they win more than one tender. So we were creating all of a sudden a TSO onshore and a bunch of small TSOs offshore. That was quite brand new at the time. Elia also had really nice pictures. Their view was this one. I don't know if it's still on your homepage, but that was my favorite, you know. I really liked Elia's view of offshore plugs. Okay, then what was another key question we were already discussing at that time? Who should pay? So who should pay for these grid connections? Should it be the wind farm developer, or should it just be all of us through tariffs? There, again, all the countries chose for something completely different. In Germany, they applied super shallow charges to all these initial offshore developments. In Sweden, it was shallow, and in the UK, super shallow, but with a locational component. If you wonder what does that mean, don't worry, I have a few pictures for you. Deep, which at that time was not applied by any of the countries, but deep means you pay as a developer not only for that sort of internal grid, not only for the connection to shore, but also for the reinforcements you might cause deeper into the grid. Now, of course, as you can imagine, to really calculate that, which grid reinforcement is exactly the consequence of connecting which offshore wind farm, that's not that easy. That's why maybe most countries actually went for something more simple. more easy to identify, as I already said, right? Either shallow, and shallow means you pay for these two developments. Super shallow only means that you pay for the internal grid of the offshore wind farm. So then when we analyzed again the same 3 countries, we said, that's nice for offshore wind developers that they don't pay anything in Germany, but it means they have no signal, right? So if the TSO is saying to offshore wind developers, let's aggregate your project so it's cheaper, they don't get that signal. They don't care if it's cheaper, right? Because transmission costs are just socialized among all the users. So, okay, very different. We have still not harmonized this in Europe. So we still have these issues, right? That different countries have different approaches. Now, is that a problem? Not necessarily. Sometimes it's really okay that you have different approaches. But I think in the case of offshore, we might need to harmonize a bit more. And we were already saying that from the beginning. And why? Well, so why were we arguing? It's basically B, that we think we need a bit more EU. Well, we saw the first hybrid solution that was discussed was Kriegers Flak. Today you have many more of these projects. And Kriegers Flak basically, as you can see there, is between Denmark, Sweden and Germany. And you have potentially 3 offshore wind developments. Meanwhile, they have been built. And they are by accident on the different territories of these 3 countries. But as you can see, they are very close. Right? So you could consider it as one project, but in reality, they were developed as 3 different projects with each their connection, while maybe, you know, the cost-benefit analysis was showing that it could make sense to do something like that. But that's really hard if it's an international setting. Why? Well, as you remember, the Swedish offshore wind developers had to pay their own connection, while at the German side, it was the TSO doing it. So the TSOs could not necessarily talk to each other and do that project together, right? And they had very different incentives also to cooperate or not cooperate. Now, jump forward. So that was the classics. Jump forward to the market reform. And I will connect it to offshore. Well, first of all, I don't know if you followed the market reform, but we risked losing everything we built the last 20 years. Gerd already made an allusion, you know, a reference to that the electricity market got so much bad press. Politicians really thought that, you know, they were to blame for everything that went wrong in this crisis. And then lots of experts had to say, no, we really don't think the problem was the way these markets function. They actually did what they were supposed to do. It's just a situation that was problematic. One thing that happened, which I think is amazing, is a country like France, right? As you see on the left, always been an export country, all of a sudden became an import country. And thanks to electricity markets, you know, every country sort of automatically helped France in that difficult situation, just because of prices and the way our markets function. And I always thought that was a nice tweet by Eurelectric to say, in a moment of crisis, we don't need carnival, right? We just need markets to function. Now, what else? Well, of course, our market is not perfect. And I think during the crisis, we noticed several issues. We had issues in energy poverty and inflation. We noticed that there were some issues with insufficient hedging by consumer and retailers. We also saw some frustration of certain consumers that they could not more access directly renewable projects. And of course, we created also a bit of investment uncertainty. For instance, because governments intervened a lot in markets during the crisis. So we had to fix that. And I think what is nice about this proposal is that it has some elements in each of these topics. And I guess I don't have time to go into all of them, but several were basically already mentioned. CFDs were mentioned, PPAs were mentioned. And why is that relevant for offshore? And that's my last slide. Well, first of all, I think the whole PPA development, right, will be offshore. Aymeric already said, traditionally, this was mainly done by companies with good credit rating. The proposal foresees that governments, which they have already done in Spain and Norway, could help give some financial guarantees so that also other type of companies that have maybe not the same credit rating could enter into these PPAs. Some governments were saying we should do it, everything. That's why CFDs were so prominent, because basically CFD is the same as a PPA, but instead of having a contract between a developer and a consumer, you have a contract between the government and a developer. But if the government starts to contract long-term with all these developers, then you start to, intervene a lot in the market, maybe unnecessarily. And in that sense, I think the proposal strikes a nice balance between promoting PPA, but also still having the option of CFD when it's really needed. Gerd mentioned very shortly this transmission access guarantee, which I think is quite interesting, that this proposal was not really focused on offshore, but something on offshore was sort of sneaked in. And I think it was a long-standing discussion, like if you go for hybrid assets, you combine connection of offshore wind farm with interconnection, there is this additional risk for wind farms to be curtailed in case the interconnector gets priority. And what do we do then? Is that a risk that they should just bear? Or is that a risk that should be compensated in a regulatory way? And this transmission access guarantees, basically, the idea is that there would be a possibility to compensate wind farms. So it's interesting how that will be developed. I heard it's a very controversial part of the reform, so I'm not sure if it will stay in the final version. If it will be very interesting to see how that will be implemented in detail. So that's one of the many reasons I'm interested to do new research in offshore, to come back to some of the classical questions, but also to pick up some of the newest developments. That was it. Thank you.
We have time for 2 quick questions, then we will move to the panel session. So if anyone has any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. And my question is, in the past 10 years, it seems like different countries have different approaches. So what is your point of view for the challenge on this grid? Is there something that they should come together to make a similar system? Or you think it's actually not a problem to continue in this way? Thank you.
I think... well, I'm not sure if this works. Okay, I have to eat it like an ice cream. Now I feel really like... not my job, but okay. No, I think more and more people are convinced. 10 years ago, we did not yet know how big offshore would be, right? So you could still say, do we really need something more European? Now I think, the newest numbers, you've seen it from the other presentations, it's massive. And if you really want it to happen, I don't think it's enough just to have national approaches and then hope that if you add those national approaches, you will get to somewhere. So I feel that more and more people see that we need something a bit more European. How it will look like, I don't know. Some people say we should have planning. Maybe it's enough to have European planning and then the projects could still be national somehow. Maybe that's true. Some people are saying, no, we should also be able to pay partly these projects from some sort of European fund or something like that. So there have been several ideas already floated. Yeah, I don't know which one it will be, but for sure we will see some new developments, I think. But it's normal that this kind of more ambitions, big reforms, have not been picked up now, because if you really want to do something big at European level, you need a lot more time to develop it. So it's probably something that's going to be picked up by the next European Commission. Because I don't know if you know, but we already have elections coming up in summer next year. So that means that we are at the end of a mandate of the European Commission. And it's difficult to take new legislative initiatives at the end of a mandate. But that means we have time now to reflect and think and to propose good ideas that can then be picked up later.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. It should be a pretty quick question, actually. I'm just curious, you put the 2 poll questions up. So you said Dirk had strong opinions on it. Do you, and what would they be?
So that was when I put up the, I don't know, Dirk, if you want to share your... So, yeah, it's in private conversations. No, I think one idea that some people say, but if I go back, I think, so it's on this poll, the first one. This one. So who should do it, right? And a typical idea that always comes up is that TSOs are more functioning from a national perspective, right? So you could actually combine. You could somehow have maybe TSOs do the planning, but maybe not all the development. Some of the development is tendered out. So you could think of combining even those three, I think. Yeah, but it is true. Whatever we do, we will need more coordination, and you need an entity that can coordinate, right?
Of course. And any opinion on the second one? Who should pay for it?
Well, I mean, if the offshore wind developers don't pay for anything, it's hard to convince them to be part of a hybrid asset or something, right? Because they don't see the benefits of it. So, yeah, there you would want them to at least pay for a part. I'm not saying the deep charges, but at least, you know, have some incentive.
Thank you for the presentation.
I was just thinking I'm not the moderator yet, so I can still say whatever I want. And I think the discussion went when we talked about the needed investment offshore for TSOs, and a back of the envelope calculation showed that this was 50% of the annual turnover of TSOs, which is not what they do today. That might not be the right persons to actually invest billions of tariff payers. Budget, billions, and you saw in the Tijd this week that there were lots of complaints that the energy tariffs will go up. Well, they ain't seen nothing yet, and it will go a lot higher in the future, especially if the TSO needs to do that. So that was maybe the unbiased opinion that I have. But it's going to be a tough question, and it's not just because you need to invest in the Belgian offshore grid and the Dutch offshore grid and the German offshore grid, but also in the Austrian. The Austrians need to co-invest as well in those additional lines through the Netherlands to make sure that they get electricity. And that's going to be an interesting question to see how we are going to convince the Dutch to build transmission lines in the Netherlands for the Germans. It's interesting discussions there. Yeah.
I agree, and we have a few mechanisms that we have, but they are very small scale. So we already have the Connecting Europe facility, which is European money that we can use for projects that are strategic for Europe, but where the countries involved say we need support. So it exists, but it's relatively small scale type of money. We also have already a mechanism called the cross-border cost allocation, whereby two countries that host an asset can say there is another country that benefits and we want that country to contribute to the costs. And then if the countries don't agree, because of course that other country might say, I prefer not to pay, right? Then in that case, we have ACER that already has, you know, the European Agency for Cooperation of Regulators, also when they don't want to cooperate, is that they could rule on it. And for the moment, they have done that in very exceptional cases, but in principle, we already have a regulatory framework that could be explored further for these type of cases. No, exact, yeah. Well, the setup we have of the Connecting Europe facility is basically just saying, okay, we don't allocate everything through tariffs anymore. We use subsidies, the general budget. So that could be scaled up. That's just countries agreeing to increase that budget, right? And we have every so many years a discussion at the European level on the multi-annual finance framework. So it has been done before. So that could be done. The other one on this cross-border cost allocation mechanism, if that could be scaled up, I have looked at many, it's not so easy to really allocate costs according to benefits. We know that from the national level. At the national level, we don't bother, we just socialize the cost because it's too difficult. So also at international level, it's not so, you know, even if we would give the powers to Acer to do it, they would be in a difficult position, right? Because who benefits depends on the scenarios, and then what do you do? Do you only look ex ante? Do you also check ex post if the situation is actually different? And so it can start to become very, very complicated, I think. Yeah, and I don't know anywhere in the world that they have something like that that works better than in Europe. So there is no easy reference also. Also in the US, they've talked for a long time about the beneficiary pay principle, and they tried to implement it, but they struggled with it as well.
All right, thank you very much for the presentation, Leonardo. Indeed very interesting. Thank you, everyone. Yeah. Now we will move on to the panel session, but before we do that, we have an announcement for the people who are following us online about the questions.
Yeah, just wanted to let the online participants know that we have a Mentimeter link in the email, so you can post your question, and especially during this panel session, so feel free to post your question in the Mentimeter link. Thank you.
Okay. You need to put them. Otherwise the cable is not long enough. Yeah. Like the previous time. Or you want me to use the headset? Yeah, there is a headset actually for you. I don't know this. In the meantime, the chairs are there for those that you know what to do. Huh? Okay. Yeah, should work, I think. Not really. This is better. Yes. Okay. So first of all, I would like to congratulate the student branch for organizing again a very nice symposium. I mean, this is something you might not know, but it's actually something I started, I think 2005, first edition. So I'm very happy that this continues, so well done. Also very happy that we have a TSO, we have an investor, we have a GENCO market specialist and someone with a regulation background. So I hope that there would be lots of conflicts already, but unfortunately they agreed quite a lot during the discussion, so still we'll try to find some room for discussion next. Also happy to see that Leo has really taken up the role of professor. He was already orating to the audience, and it was hard to keep him within time, and students might recognize that also for us it's always difficult to keep ourselves to the timing that we have. That being said, let's start with the debate. I don't know how many minutes we have. You want us to stop 9:45 or at 10? At 10. Okay, so let's see what we have. Maybe we'll start with the following. I mean, now I said it was all nice and peaceful as a discussion, but you might have picked up something from what the others have said while you were sitting and listening to them. Are there any things that you would like to react on that was said by some of your colleagues? Is that something that you say, okay, I didn't really like what Ade said about the grid, but I didn't say before, or Ade, as a TSO, there were some nasty things said about bidding zones, also making them smaller, so maybe also onshore. I don't know who wants to take up. I mean, the idea of a debate is that we kind of get a little bit of interaction and not disagreement, but at least heated discussion. So I'm trying to raise the fire a little bit. Not putting any pressure, huh? Please.
Yeah. So maybe I had a small comment. So when it was about financing the grid, so that was a bit of discussion we had at the very last part of the discussion. We should not forget maybe that there are two ways of getting revenues for the TSOs. The first thing is about defining tariffs for final consumers and to define some allocation of that cost. But there's also the congestion rent that can be captured by by the market, so by through the market functioning, and so then smaller bidding zones would also help, financing partially that grid. So to have a mixture of congestion rents, and then the delta that is of course still to be financed by tariffs. So even in a nodal system, you still have a part of the cost that needs to be financed by tariffs. But I think smaller bidding zones helps also for that question, I would say. We agree.
Okay.
Maybe the TSO has another view on that.
We don't. We are more of a facilitator. I mean,
use a microphone, please.
We don't. We are regulated, so I mean, the government decides what we do. So.
Yeah. Well, maybe. But so to a certain extent, I guess, but that's maybe not your job to influence the government in the decision-taking process. But maybe as there are not a lot of things here, I think it's interesting that we talk about offshore grids and developments in the North Sea, and the significant part of the discussion was not very technical, and we're a very technical audience here. So maybe I can ask a question, not going into dynamic simulations or something like that. Don't want to go in that direction. But I found it a little bit a chicken and egg element in it. So a few times mentioned that the grid needs to be there for the wind to happen, and then there is also what is going to be there first, and what is the element that kicks it off, because or maybe it's the market that needs to be in place, and there is uncertainty. So what I find a little bit is that people are all saying, yes, we need to have offshore grids, yes, we need to have offshore developments, and maybe a multi-terminal HVDC grid is what I would like to have. But people are looking at each other, and things are not really happening. So which is the chicken and which is the egg here? So what will set us free? Who wants to kick off?
Yeah, so as I said already before, markets have to be designed, I would say, but there's also in electricity, there's always a big part which is about planning. We had the discussion indeed also at the last part. So we definitely need more planning than probably in the past. So we have to decarbonize the system. So it's not just about planning the electricity system, it's also about planning the hydrogen network, maybe also storage and CO2 grids. So there's definitely more prominent role to play by a central authority. So we need more planning.
And who does that planning? Because is that then ADE that should do the planning?
So I would say, so you have to have an independent authority at European level who has not property somehow, because otherwise you might have some. Yeah, so I mean, you need an independent European. In the best way, the first best would be to have a European planning authority that has no financial interest in the assets, like an ISO in the US, but then for the whole energy system, because then you can have a planning, you can then define where do we need additional lines, and then you can for the investment you could even say, okay, I need that line that has some value for society, so we need to get that line, and then you can tender that line. And then, but the operation is still done centrally by some independent authority, but also the planning.
I like it, even if your economist background, that sounds like an engineering solution. I think we can easily do that.
We need both. So electricity is always physical and economic, so two sides of the same coin.
Leo, do you think that this is something we can do by the end of next year? Because it sounded like a fairly simple concept that had some straight rules, so maybe a year should be enough to get that done, right?
But Gerd referred to the concept of an ISO, right? And the ISOs in the US, they do more than planning. They are operators. So you could have a European planning authority, but it doesn't have to be an ISO. So, right, that's true. Huh?
But you should not have interests. You should not have interests in financial interest in the assets. Yeah. That's all right.
Yeah. This gives me a lot of power.
Yeah, someone wants to. There's a second one.
No. So I think everybody is thinking currently on how that planning can happen, right? Because, I mean, what we have in terms of planning is already quite unique in the world. Even the 10-year network development plan, which is far from perfect, there are other places in the world that are jealous that we even have a process like that, right? But it's not really top-down, it's more bottom-up. But still, what we have is quite unprecedented in the world. So, because the US has ISOs, but they are limited in scope, so they don't really currently have a kind of planning authority for the country even. So we want to have it for the continent. So I really do not know what is the best type of entity that could do that type of planning. But yeah, I agree we need it.
Ade, do you want to be the planner? Are TSOs the planners or NSOE?
We already do some part of it,
but not at the European level.
No, not at Europe. No, not at European level.
Because you do the network development plan was approved, I understood, today or yesterday by the government. So probably a big party at Elia's side.
Probably.
But and I saw the TENET plans that they have for the target grid for 2050. If I looked at it, I thought, well, they forgot that they have neighbors, so they did half of the work. Everyone does the planning for themselves. I mean, they did a good job in thinking 2050, good, but yeah. They forgot that Belgium was a neighboring country that they would have to build lines. So how do we get there? And basically, are you willing to let go? Because that central planning authority will tell you where to build your lines.
I think this is what NSOE should be doing, but I'm not sure why they are not doing this. Probably they are too slow, or because they have a better view of the European system than the individual operators within. So this should be done at the NSOE level, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that's the scale. I don't know whether the NSOE is the right body to do it as it is.
They should be mandated to do it, because I mean it's basically an agency for cooperation for all the European TSOs. So at least it should be part of the mandate, because if everyone have to do it, we see the case of TENET, and they just went basically distorted the market, and I mean there was no discussion between each other, and it becomes difficult because at the end of the day, they will have a surplus. Somebody's got to take it from them. If they don't, then what is the point of the investment? But then if everyone makes independent decisions like this, it doesn't work out eventually. But yeah. Okay. Is what we have today.
And Aymeric, is that something that from an investor point of view, would you like to see that central planning authority coming along and decide what happens? Is that a good step in the right direction?
Yeah, well, I was glad that it was mentioned, because in fact it's the first time that I hear about it. But I think it's needed, because if you look at the Belgian situation, Elia does a very good job, but they are biased. Yeah, and so at a certain moment, sometimes when you read their position papers, you think, is it a neutral research paper, or is this propaganda? So
I never thought it was neutral.
Well, but you know it. I know it. We know it because we are in the market. But yeah, not everyone knows that. So definitely, I think that, as Gerd says, a party with no financial interests should have a bigger role to play, and it goes further than electricity only. It goes. It's about the development of the energy system of the future in Europe.
But we did notice that although that we had this warm feeling after 22nd of February last year in Europe, joining together, that is not, well, in a way it led to a European thinking again, but still everyone's still on its own. So I think that not everyone would like to. I mean, it's already difficult for Elia to say a transmission line in Belgium should be there. I can imagine that many Polish people would not appreciate someone in Brussels telling where a transmission line should be built. So it is going to be an interesting thing. But
yeah, I just want to add, you see a cooperation coming up. So around the countries around the North Sea are talking more and more with each other. Right? The energy ministers that talk with each other. So the North Sea Summit was organized in Ostend last week. I think there were 9 countries present. So it's a first step.
Yeah.
And I think the ministers are getting it, so what you just said. Yeah.
Slowly.
So,
Yeah,
slowly, but steadily.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Leo wants to react on that.
No,
well.
I have the scarce resource.
You have to know that we did the PhD around the same time. We know each other. So, no, but just to say, Dirk, planning authority can mean many different things. I don't, like you say, it doesn't have to mean that you have one entity in Europe that can dictate other countries what they have to invest in, but it could be something softer in the sense that you would have a 10-year network development plan, which is something bottom-up, and then some entity tries to look top-down, like, you know, what projects are not getting off the ground in the normal bottom-up process. And if we would then have a sort of European investment possibility, then you could, the gap could be filled not by obliging, but by, you know, softly using certain European funds to get where we want to be, you know? So there are many softer ways of implementing that, I think, which we are good at in Europe.
But it takes time to develop, so maybe not end of next year then, maybe the year after or something like that, yeah. Okay, we also have a question from the audience. Someone is concerned, and I think this is a little bit a question, it's a reliability question, so I guess I'll ask the TSO first. With all these cables offshore, are we going to have any issues with attacks to our infrastructure? I mean, we will put significant amount of energy concentrated on a single location, and yeah, you could have the Russians that attack the Nord Stream, or maybe they did it, maybe the Ukraine, I don't know, someone could. Does Elia fear that we have someone attacking the energy island?
No, we don't, but the risks are always there. I think the risks will always be there. It will be there.
It also can happen onshore, probably, because then you don't even need to hire a boat, and you can go to a substation. And
I mean, it's not just Russian. It could be. I mean, it could be an anchor from a ship that just got lost somewhere and drops the anchor. And the risks are there, but try to minimize this using the permitting procedures to make sure that these routes they are properly demarcated. But the risks will always be there. I think.
Okay, very good. Then you also came here, maybe you also, from the audience, you have a question now, that, or if someone else wants to talk about reliability, has a different opinion, maybe we can. Because that's, by the way, also one of the things that are not so easy to quantify. I mean, it's typically we do cost when we develop systems, but the fact that you provide with a grid also reliability to another country, and how to quantify that, how to put the value of that is something which is pretty hard. And or sustainability, to what extent do you want to contribute for sustainability by hedging on your neighbor's system? So those it's not that trivial. So with that, I give you the opportunity to think about the question that you had yourself. So if someone wants to ask the panel, I see a question there in the back. So now you have to use the wired one, yes. And can you state also to whom you, it's the person with the red t-shirt, to whom you want to address the question, or to the entire panel?
To the entire, panel, I want to ask, who is a fan of nodal pricing and why?
I expected hands raised very quickly by some, but they're a little bit slow. So can we do the line and nodal pricing, yes or no? I think this is going to be, this might be a yes.
But from my side, I would say yes, because from a purely economic point of view and also from a technical point of view, so it's the maximum of information you can integrate that you can integrate in the market. So your dispatch can you cannot beat the dispatch of a nodal system because you have an integration of the physical aspects. So all the different characteristics of the plants, you have the information of the grid, and then you do your clearing, and you do not separate the two, so you cannot beat that kind of system. So in terms of short-term dispatch, you cannot improve upon that. What you then also have as an advantage long-term is that you provide better information with respect to the location. So if you want to invest, or if you want to decide to also to invest in a power-consuming plant, so a large industrial user, so he has better information where to put that, where to do the investment in location. Another point is that, well, you integrate a larger part of your network in the market clearing, so it improves competition again, because you do not need to take margins, security margins, because you know that there's some redispatch going on, and you take some reserve margins on the grid that you give to the market. It gives also more transparency on where to put additional lines, because you see the nodal prices, so you see the value more in a better way. What's the value of putting another line in some region? So you overall provide more transparency to the system. So it's controversial indeed. So even within Engie, we have pros and cons, and for instance, so it's very controversial. But from a purely economic, technical point of view, you cannot do better than that.
Do we have a full agreement in the panel, or are there some diverse opinions here?
Well, the only thing I can say is that most academics would say yes, but there are a few that are putting some buts. And one but I saw in the recent crisis, like the discussion was, is it now, right? Even though that in theory it's good, then it's always, when is the moment? Is now, should we push nodal as a solution to the crisis we just had? And there, maybe it was not the moment to push it as a solution for the current crisis, because in the current crisis there is a lot of nervousness, a lot of, we need to hedge more. And then if there is one thing where we, the ones that are a bit more skeptical are worried, is how forward markets will still be able to be liquid. And then there are examples in the US where they have been trying to fix that with these, what is called virtual hubs. By the way, the concept of these virtual hubs is in the market reform proposal.
It's going too fast. So indeed, but that's going too fast. The European Commission is making 2 steps too fast. So because for the moment we just have these financial transmission rights for cross-border. So the first step would be to have financial transmission rights point to point first, and then go maybe afterwards to hub, because in the end, if you go to smaller bidding zones or even nodal pricing, the concept of proxy hedging, what we are currently doing in the market, so hedging with a large zone like Germany, is not valid anymore, because there are smaller bidding zones. So you need to go to financial transmission rights.
And is that also by your colleagues in the panel? You agree on?
Maybe about the nodal pricing. I think there's always a balance to find between the, let's say, the research optimum, the theoretical optimum, and what is socially acceptable. So nodal pricing. No, I have sometimes difficulty to explain what I do to my family, to my friends. What should I do, or how will I explain it when we start having a system of nodal pricing? I'm joking a bit, but I mean the consequences of applying a nodal system in an existing power market system and in existing grids can be very bad for some people and very good for other people or companies. So that's just something to always take into consideration. That's also why Germany, talking about the bidding zones, is still one bidding zone, because the border between 2 bidding zones that would have to be implied active in Germany is on the border between East and West Germany. So you can imagine that.
No, it's more a north-south.
Okay, but it's when you draw the line. I mean, it's politically very sensitive. So just my message is there are other things to take into consideration and not to forget.
I've been into meetings where we were suggesting to do a study for bidding zones, and we noticed that half of the people in the room were smaller bidding zones, and the other half, they didn't really like us. It's really a hot topic. Nobody asked any questions on nuclear so far, but bidding zones is equally sensitive in the sector. Sometimes you have been moments that you went into when bidding zones were mentioned, discussion was over and meeting was done. Nothing useful came of that meeting anymore. So maybe we'll also take that as an opportunity to go to a next question because this one might be better for beer to get to a solution. Yeah, a question here at the front.
So I'm actually quite surprised no one has mentioned the digitalization of the energy market. And I was wondering how will because the EU has already made clear that they want to have a digitalized EU energy market. How will this digitalization of these energy infrastructures influence those on and offshores?
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe nothing specific to offshore, but I would say digitalization is an enabler of flexibility. So it should not be the goal as such. We are not doing digitalization because we like digitalization. No, it's an enabler to bring flexibility to the system, to the market. So digitalization might mean that we just have a smart meter, or that we have integrated tools that somehow communicate with the market to benefit from hourly price differences, to operate your heat pump or to charge your EV in a more intelligent way, or discharging your EV in a more intelligent way. So that's about digitalization. So you should see it as an enabler. Things are already there, so you can do that already now. So because you can have smart tools, you can have a price so a time varying price contract. That's something you can do. So go for it. So yeah.
But I think what you say is very important, and you already see it now in the market. So you have the big incumbents like Engie and Luminous, which are not very good at digitization. Yeah? And then you have the. I'm sorry. And then I'm a bit too extreme, but when you look at the ancillary services market, which is a small market, but which is a market where you have to react to market signals that change every 4 seconds, where you have to organize inside your company a bid ladder, a merit order of the contract you have. You cannot do it in an optimal way and in an efficient way if you're not very good at data management and digitalization. So that's what you see in the market, that ancillary services have been picked up by small, flexible company good at data management and digital things. And companies like Engie and Luminous, they failed because of that. That's how I see it. So it's already.
I see that Gerd agrees.
My message is it's already there, and so now the next step is to ensure that consumers of all kinds also become active. But that's a bit also the answer of Gerd on my question I had. You have to look for it where the value is, and not. It's not that if it's not valuable, just leave it as is. Yeah.
Without starting a full debate, it might also be that the ones that are incumbent have assets, and like you mentioned, they are 80, 90, 95% of the total energy, total price is energy. And then to enter that market, those companies you focus on the 5%. That's a different business model and a different environment, and it might not be, the focus might lie slightly different. But I don't think that Engie does not bid on ancillary services, because otherwise we would have.
But you just see that for in the 3 big big companies that have most of the ancillary service contracts with industrials and smaller consumers. It's not Engie and Luminous. It's Nextkraftwerk, Flexity, Centrica, which are really very good at data and digital management. That was my. I agree with you. Yeah.
I said we want to have a debate, so that again, it's okay to push. It's no problem to push other panelists a little bit. Anyone else wants to ask? Yeah.
I have a question to Gerd, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Sorry. So we talked about flexibility. This might not be directly related to offshore, but what do you think about stacked flexibility? Like flexibility coming in from different assets like thermal carriers, electricity carrier, gas carrier, and then do you see multi-energy grids anytime soon happening on the distribution or the transmission side? And what do you think about that? Just curious to know. So right now we are talking only about electricity, right? Like electricity grids, but there is also district heat, there is also some gas carriers. We are also talking about hydrogen. So what if, because there is also a debate about multi-energy grids in which there would be flexibility provided by all these assets like thermal. So just wondering, what do you think, what's its future like in Europe?
Did we only invite half a panel, and we should have had someone from Fluxys and also here present today?
Yeah. So indeed. So well, the grids have to work increasingly together somehow, and so one is providing flexibility to the other. I would say most of flexibility is needed for in the electricity grid for just physical reasons. So in the gas grid, so you have more. I would say I'm not an expert, but you have not the same kind of flexibility requirements than in a power grid. But of course, so an electrolyzer, for instance, is expected to provide potentially huge flexibility to a system, because depending on the way this is operated, so it takes power from the grid to produce hydrogen, but depending on the way, so it puts then electricity in the form of hydrogen into the hydrogen network or in the natural gas grid, it depends. That's potentially huge flexibility provider, and so that's what we see also in the molds. Depending on the level of flexibility you allow to those to these electrolyzers, yeah, it makes a different, a huge change in the system. You also have, of course, competition between those flexibility providers. So if you allow for some level of flexibility provided by heat pumps and EVs, you kill the business model of not a few dedicated batteries, because it's just flexibility that you might have there almost for free, because people are not investing in EVs to deliver flexibility to the grid, but to ride with it. But technology might be so usual of cheap that you will get a lot of flexibility potentially at very low prices. So I'm not sure whether flexibility is really the scarce resource forward looking.
So we have this multi-energy box that we opened now. Maybe someone else wanted to talk about multi-energy as part of the future and focus maybe on the offshore, and we'll get to the hydrogen and then as well. So, yeah.
We hosted not too long ago an online event with Tom Brown from Berlin University, and he quite nicely did some simulations on trade-offs between building out an electricity grid versus a hydrogen network. And I was surprised that his results show that it's not that obvious which is optimal. There are a lot of near-optimal solutions where you have very different grid build-out, either more electric, less electric, and so I really believe that it's not obvious which will lead us to the best place. I think it might be the result of where we are stuck and then have no other option to do something else, and once we start to build out, we might do more of that than we maybe anticipate today. So these interactions seem to be a hot topic for the future. If you look at policy and regulation, the 10-year network development plan, we start to have a more integrated gas and electricity plan. The ENTSO-E and ENTSO-G have been asked more and more to do this joint planning. Now the big question is, will we do the same at distribution? Because currently at distribution we only have European legislation for electricity, multi-annual year plan. So now in the gas package, I think there is also that discussion to do it for gas. And then the next thing is, will you then also integrate? So yeah, it's a really hot topic, an important topic.
I think something that illustrates that the importance of multi-energy approach is when you look at Europe, the gas consumption in winter is for one third comes from stored gas that has been stored during the summer. It's a huge amount of energy that is being stored. So that shows that what the challenge is of making everything electrical, because you cannot store electricity. You have to transform it into another form of storage, be it hydrogen or a high difference of or chemical energy. A battery stores electricity after transforming it into chemical energy. So I think the storage thing is maybe even more important when talking about the importance of multi-energy than flexibility.
On the long run.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, very quick, Gerd, and then I would like to...
Yeah, very quick. Coming back also then again on the tariffs. So we have especially the discussion on tariffs for the gas grid. So you know that, well, over time, so we will use less and less the natural gas grid because the consumption of gas will be declining. But still the natural gas grid has a kind of insurance role because gas assets are still needed when there's not enough renewables, for instance. So, and then we might have a question about how to allocate those costs to the consumers, and then we might have a tariff setting that is just energy-based and not just electricity or natural gas-based, so that we just consider the total cost of the grids, energy grids, and then we allocate it maybe across energy, whatever the energy carrier behind. So that maybe also a reflection to bring into the discussion.
Is that something where the system operator, because I know, for instance, in Denmark, you have a system operator that does gas and electricity, Energinet. I know that Elia works a lot together. We don't do that in Belgium. Is that something that we need to have in the future? I put you here at the spot. You can say what you think, and then we'll put that out in the summary this evening as the opinion of Elia.
No, thank you.
And I have the opportunity tomorrow to talk with your CEO. So, but it is something that is not necessarily made easy by the structures that are in different countries are slightly different. Elia is a transmission system operator until 30 kilovolts, and in the Netherlands this is not the case. In Denmark they have gas and electricity. So maybe that's a good introduction to my next question is today's organization of the European energy markets, is that fit for purpose for what we need to have in 2050? And from the TSO and from the investor market and regulatory viewpoint, and I'm just thinking, I mean, the role of the stakeholders. We talked about energy versus capacity, bidding zones, the Belgian TSO in the European market context, risk exposure. Yeah, there are lots of things that. So maybe the question to the panel is double. There's one thing that I mean, it's almost Christmas. Let's assume. We talked about religion. There's somewhere Christmas in some religions. That's okay. And you can have two wishes. One is for your own, what you think should happen to your own organization, and one, what do you want for some of your friends around the panel to change? So where do you want for instance, for Ade, what do you want that the market or the GenCo would change in regulation or in approach? Is that a clear challenge? It's a nice one, I think. Yeah. Maybe I'll let you think a bit. Who wants to start? Who has a wish list? What are the things? Because my feeling is, yeah, I mean, we're not going to get 450 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2050 if we're going to do what we do today. I think that's... we're not going to get 200 if we do what we do today. So we need to do something different. The investments will not be there, the grids will not be there, the markets are stopping it, and regulation is too slow because Leo used his slides from 10 years ago, and he had to admit that they were still relevant, and I'm afraid that they might be relevant in 10 years still. So clearly there are some things that need to change.
My personal opinion is things have been done really in a disorganized manner, at least at the European level, because there has to be, I mean, every year they go to these political meetings like the one 1 or 2 weeks ago, and they always promise more gigawatts, but it doesn't make sense to me because you are promising more gigawatt, but the industry is not there to support it. The wind power industry, they are in trouble. I mean, they are bleeding. So, but where's all these promises coming from? So I think things can be done a little bit more organized, more coordinated, at least at the European level, because it's every man for everyone for himself, which doesn't make sense. If you look at things happening on the Danish side, I mean, they had plans for they have the plans for the highland, and but they had big plans, let's say 10 gigawatts. But more recently, they're starting to see that everybody also wanted to have their own energy island. So who are they going to sell the 10 gigawatt to? And then 10 gigawatts suddenly became 4. You know.
Just 10. That's 1/40 of what.
Okay, I know. So the point is things have been done really in a disorganized manner. There has to be some coordination at the European level, and it's starting to change because the crisis brought a lot of TSOs together, and I think is the way to go. It's still a little bit slow, but there should be some coordination.
Okay. Now we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. Thank you, Ade. I think it's a very good answer. So coordination already ticked. So you cannot use coordination on the European level anymore as a wish list. So I mean, presents can only be given once. Who wants to be next? Leo thinks, otherwise my present is going to be gone.
No, just to correct maybe the perception that regulation is going slow. I think what we achieved the last 20 years is unbelievable, really. When I started following electricity markets, we said, that's a taboo, that will never happen, and it all happened. So really, and we should be proud of that. I mean, we can joke, but we should really not, forget what we already achieved. But then as a wish list, so I think what we achieved is that we exposed our power system to these market price signals, and we dispatch over really large distances, which we need for a renewable-based system, so that's fantastic. Now, I think, it's more a bit about guiding investments, because we are accelerating investments. We are more and more worried that there is a gap between our ambitions and implementation. So I think my wish list for the next big reform would be that we are also willing to discuss more mechanisms for investments at European level, because, for instance, we have capacity mechanisms where at the European level we didn't really want to embrace them fully, so we left them at the national level, and I think there a next big reform could be about that, and also about infrastructure investments. We need new instruments to accelerate investment. That's, for me, is clear. And we've never discussed that because we didn't feel the need as much the last 20 years. It's not that we already 20 years ago knew that we needed that as much as we need it today.
I think, okay, yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, I can just agree with what Leo said. So we need more coordination, of course, but we have reached indeed already a quite high level of coordination, because in the end, so we have to realize that we are in the European Union with different member states. They have their competences in energy, and so you should not take that away from Ali, because it creates otherwise you create a risk that people will not support the transition if you take a too centralized approach. So it's somehow a delicate way of giving some central direction, but still leaving some room of freedom to member states. And that's an exercise that is maybe particular to the European Union, and we managed that quite successfully indeed over the last 20 years. So indeed, so more planning with respect to investment, more guidance, but it's also less about markets, about long-term planning. It's just also about implementation. So we are waiting sometimes 4 to 5 years to get a wind onshore park accepted and connected to the grid. So that's the most blocking point for the moment. It's less about market, it's less about long-term guidance. It's just to get the wind park, the permit, and the grid access. It's very basic.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. I fully agree. Very good answers. And
Yeah,
now, and they said that we need guidance for investors. I think you must be very pleased that investors will be helped. Aymeric, what's your wish list?
Maybe because your question was what is your wish list? So I take a bit more distance, and when you look at Europe, at the foundation of Europe, Europe is in fact the coal and steel union. So it started with a union about energy, and I really hope that we can continue to evolve again towards a European energy union, because it's of such strategic importance for our society and economy. We cannot play with it. So that's my wish list, and maybe a second element, if I can.
A small present, maybe.
So what I think lacks a lot in the discussions is the importance, or the making clear to people that everything you do and buy is based on energy. And so it's important that consumers also start to think smartly about what they do, what they buy, because that will help in the transition. If we need less energy because we are more efficient, then the transition will become more easy, and then there will be less discussions about we need a new power line there, or Austria needs to pay because we want. No, then it will be more easy.
I think
but it's controversial because no politicians want to say, I don't want you to take your car today.
But I think in education is something where we in Belgium don't necessarily do a good job. If you go to the Paris subway, don't know which one, there is a second law of thermodynamics equation on one of the walls. An equation on a wall, and one of engineering. And when I went to Copenhagen not so long ago with a plane, my apologies, in the airport they had advertisement, and not an advertisement, but more an educational video on synthetic fuels. Whether you agree or not with synthetic fuels, I leave that in the middle. But it was a technical thing that they showed. And here, if it's difficult, then on television they very quickly say, it's too difficult because I as a journalist don't understand, and let's talk about simple messages. And I think we need to educate the broader audience, and I think that's a good message. I think my time is almost up. I think we have one very quick final question, and I will ask this question for you, because I'm seeking more people to join my team. So we are seeking PhDs and postdocs and whatever, just making some advertisements, making use of this opportunity. And the question is, and I think Gerd had it on his slide as well, do we have enough people? And with people, I mean engineers, to get the job done. And economists, and welders, and whatever technician and electrician that you can find.
No, because we are looking for them. So
me too.
It's all about scarcity. Yeah. So.
Is that not a supply chain risk?
Yes, but it's not specific to the electricity sector, I would say. So the whole economy is looking for good people. Huh? Yeah, but it's no.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Price yourself high enough if you go in the job market. So don't sell yourself cheap. That's a main. Tiny question. ChatGTP for offshore grids.
I would just say I'm not a specialist of that, but I would say it creates also potentially. So you can delegate, you can automate things that are maybe getting standard, and so you should not spend time on that, and you can just spend your time more efficiently on something more interesting for you as well. So it's I would say there's always enough to be done. So it's you just automate things that can be automated, and then you do just more interesting stuff. So if you do good work, you will always find your position in society, I would say.
Okay. With that, one last thing. I would like to thank the panel for an outstanding presentation and a good discussion, and we almost solved all the problems that are out there. But still, we might have a few more for next edition, but thank you very much.